Berserk Boy is an action platformer that releases on the Nintendo Switch and the PC today, March 6th, 2024, for the price of $19.99. It describes itself as being ideal for Mega Man X fans, and considering that's in my top 10 games of all time, it was definitely a game that I wanted to cover. But will it live up to that lofty expectation? Or will it stumble and fall into an endless pit of mediocrity? That's what I'm here to find out. But before I begin, this key was obtained from the PR for the purposes of review. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Those who are used to my normal review style, you're not going to get it in this one. I'm going to try something a little bit different based on a discussion with my fiancé, and I want to try something a little bit different, mostly also because I needed something a little bit more freeform for this review. One of the first things I want to talk about is that in the pressers and the press release and information about the game makes a strict comparison of itself to a modern version of Mega Man X. And while I understand that some parts of the game definitely do have inspiration from Mega Man X, like you see that jump along the wall there, very much a Mega Man X sort of thing, it is a weird comparison in this case. Don't get me wrong, there is definitely influences from games such as Mega Man X. Azure Gunvolt is one that I can think of. But, like, in this room, for example, you have this room where you're stuck and defeating a bunch of enemies. You'll notice that I'm not necessarily shooting anything. I'm using a dash power. And this is one of the first levels of the game, with your first power, the electric power. The thing is, it sets a weird precedent for a game that's comparing itself to what is essentially a platform shooter. You know, you're charging up your Mega Buster, here you're dashing at enemies. Which does sort of feel weird with that comparison at first. Now, later on in the game, in particular with the Ice Kunai power, you do get projectiles. But this game is a lot more about movement and avoiding hazards more than anything else, at least in my opinion. When it comes to enemies, yeah, saw the dog just did some damage to me, but enemies really didn't give me a whole lot of problems here. A lot of them are pretty basic, and if you have any sort of patience, you're not going to have a problem with them. Where you're going to probably take a bunch of damage is the platforming. In particular, it's the hazards, the insta-death pits, but also this weird level design with the pacing of the game. Now, don't get me wrong, the game does have a good speed to it at times. As you can see there, it's flying me forward, it's giving me rails, you know, cannons to shoot out of, and I'm taking that and being like, okay, I've got a brisk pace going on here. I'm hitting enemies, I'm not taking a lot of damage, and then you run into a situation where you have a lot of hazards. And if you don't know the level yet, you're going to run into a bunch of those hazards, and it feels like the game sort of set you up for failure there. Now, it's not undoable. The fact of the matter is, even with repeated attempts or on the first attempt, if you're a little bit patient, you'll be able to get through the hazards. But it's the weird pacing of some of these levels where the game is giving you speed, and then all of a sudden you have to slow down in a way that does not feel natural, at least to me. Why I harp on this a little bit is that, remember, the comparison to Mega Man X is at the core here. Yes, movement was a huge part of the Mega Man series, and in particular Mega Man X. The dashes, the precise jumping in terms of certain elements of the map. You know, there was that one power that you could only get by hitting that one jump just precisely. And the fact of the matter is, that was a big part of the game, but shooting and actual enemy engagement was also a big part of it. And here, the movement is definitely the biggest part of the game, don't get me wrong, but the sort of enemy element seems to be a lot more secondary compared to other games in this genre. The fact is, the hazards are going to cause you the most problems. Yeah, you're attacking enemies, you're getting energy, you're getting things that you can upgrade your health with, but honestly, they aren't a big issue. You're going to have a bigger issue with, you know, running too fast and then all of a sudden falling into a pit. But that's at the start of the game, because as you go through the game and start to get more powers, in particular more movement powers, that's where things get a little bit more interesting in terms of the gameplay, because you're having to make decisions and choices based off of what powers that you got and what movement options that you got that are a little bit more challenging and a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. Let me show you an example here. All right, here's an example of a level in the mid-game. This is when I'm supposed to have 4 powers, although I came back to this level and had the 5th power, which allows me to pick up this guy. By the way, those are people that you can pick up. Those are your, I don't want to say collectibles, but these will unlock certain elements in terms of, you know, challenge levels and things like that if you pick up all 100% within a level. Now, regardless, elements flying ability. And the flying ability gives me a lot of control in terms of the vertical and horizontal movement, but my attack is a little bit odd. I'm able to spin a disc around me or put a shield in front of me, but obviously this is not a very offensive ability. When the game is forcing you to make some of those choices, I think the game gets a bit better. The fact is that there are sections in the game that are difficult if you are stubborn, where if you try to use a certain ability or you try to use something that is obviously not designed for, you will run into problems. But if you take the clues that the environment's giving you, like, for example, if it shows you that you can change to a certain ability or you see a ninja platform that you can grab, then you should probably be listening to it. And if you get into that sort of rhythm of, oh, okay, change to that, jump on this, dash to that, and use your abilities wisely, it is probably a top, I want to say top 30% platformer in that case. It is fun to be able to go through the level and sort of speed your way through things, use your abilities, jump over things, as long as it feels fair. There are moments in the game where it's not going to feel fair, and some of that actually has to do with some of the collision detection. There are times where I do question the hitbox around our character here. It feels a little bit bigger than what he's presenting on screen, and there have been points where I've been hit by spikes that feel like they're inconsistent with what I'm seeing on screen. Are they huge problems? No, but they're big enough problems that make me wonder about it. And some of the sections of the game are pretty precise. You don't have a lot of pixels to work with. The form of the air form going through a section of spikes that I would classify as an homage to the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game with the electric seaweed, that was a little frustrating because it felt like at times I was taking hits when I wasn't supposed to. That's the central thought I keep on coming back to, is that I was enjoying Berserk Boy. Granted, I was getting frustrated with certain elements of the game, and I was getting frustrated with it not being another Mega Man X, but I know I couldn't hold that against the game per se. But even with the parts that I was enjoying, I kept on having this thought in the back of my head that something was a little bit off. And it was on multiple levels. Here I'm spinning along with these fire spinners, and I go to jump, and I feel like the input kept on going for the spin, and it didn't jump the time that I wanted it to, and thus I hit that and, you know, fall to my death. It's little things like that that started to add up for me that made me feel like, did it get enough time in the oven? I know I've said that a couple of times over the last couple of reviews, but I really felt it with Berserk Boy. The game's not buggy. The game does not have frame issues in terms of frame rate or anything along that line. It's just that every so often, the game feels like it's missing something, or something sort of was plugged in that it wasn't supposed to be there at first. The Ice Kunai power, having the dash that was similar to the electric dash, didn't feel right to me with the design of all the other powers in the game. The fact is that every other form in this game had a very unique movement ability, and yet that one also had the same one as the electric. I found that weird. Sure, there were differences, but not differences that enough that were substantial. It's things like these spikes. Those spikes, deadly, would kill me in one hit. Those spikes that I just passed would give me damage. It's those inconsistencies that started to drive me a little insane at times. And I know that I may be nitpicking in certain elements here, but when you keep on running into that over and over and over again in the levels, it just makes you feel like maybe the game had different intentions and it just so happened that they had to release it like this. Again, an enjoyable game, but still not feeling 100% there. Now, what I will 100% agree with is the fact that there was definitely influences from Mega Man X and the Mega Man X series involving the presentation and the sound design and the music, of course. Presentation-wise, there's a lot of familiarity here, from the sort of cone-like flames that you see coming out of the ships here, to some of the enemy designs being very familiar. Having, you know, this little triangle animal here, this robot, that did remind me a lot of the designs from Mega Man, designs from Mega Man X in particular, with the sort of compact nature of the robots. I also do appreciate a lot of the color choices here. Granted, they are very based on the set of levels that you're in. Obviously, I'm in the set of air levels here, and thus you have the blue skies, you have the airships here, and I do like that all the levels use the entire spectrum of color, but in terms of your character, it does try to match the color with the element that you're using. Obviously, here I'm using green, black, and white for the actual air portion, but for the electric portion, it's nothing but purples. And so you immediately make that, you know, choice of, oh, okay, green equals air, you know, brown equals earth, so on and so forth. Very easy for people to make that mistake in terms of trying to get a little bit too fancy, but they had a little bit more restraint here, and I do appreciate it. Character and enemy designs are all over the place. I do like the base character designs, especially for our main character here, and the trap designs in particular are pretty good. I like this kunai trap that we have to get through. It's very easy to see, it is very obvious what I need to do with it, and it looks nice. It looks like something that would be of this world. Enemy design is a little bit all over the place. Sometimes they're rather simple, and simple in a good way. You can see the detail on them, but sometimes, like the robot that I just killed there's a lot of detail, but because it doesn't use entirely the color spectrum or some of the different artistic techniques to try to establish what some of those parts are, you can lose some of that detail, especially in the action portions of this game. You just can't see it, and unless you pause and actually look at it or look at a screenshot, you wouldn't notice a lot of the detail. And some of that is unexpected for a game that is influenced by the Mega Man X series. The sound design, for the most part, I like. There is a crunchiness to a lot of the sounds here, especially with some of the forms, like the kunai form. You'll hear the kunai hit the shield here, and it's got impact. It's got a crunch to it, and it really sells the impact of the move, which I really do appreciate. All the sounds are distinguishable from each other, nothing bleeds together. Alright, I paused the video for a particular reason here. I want to go back to a point that I made earlier about how things felt a little off at times. And this is a prime example. It looks like I just jumped off and I'm about to fall to my death or fall on this platform. And the thing is, neither of those are the case. Remember the drill power that I showed you before where I was digging through the earth? Yeah, let's start the video up again, shall we?
Drill claws!
Yeah, we're digging into the ship right now, which doesn't make a lot of logical sense. And you could just say, well, it's a video game. Sometimes logic is not going to make sense. But in this game, it's like, well, wait a minute. This is supposed to go into the dirt, into the ground. And you're being able to drill through the metal. Why can't you do that in other sections of the game? Why can't you be able to drill through any wall? It's that kind of inconsistency that starts to add up over time. You may call it nitpicking, but you'll also notice that in this section, in particular when I dug into that part of the earth, there was no indicator. Earlier in the level, you did have the electric indicator to get through a certain section, so why not the fire indicator for that dig section? Would it made logical sense still? Probably not, you're still digging through metal, but at least for the player, that gives an indication that it is purposeful, that it makes sense for you to go into it, because the game's telling you, yeah, other than what just happened, where I was like, is this a bug? Later on, I figured it out with the energy, but it's those kind of things that can drive you insane. We're about 15 minutes in this video, and I have a confession to make. I purposely made this footage to highlight a certain element of the game. You probably noticed that the music in the game seems very soft. It seems very in the background. And that's because I went into the options and turned the music down from a 10 to a 4. Purposefully. Because I wanted to make a point about it. The music was done by Sonic Mania composer T. Lopez. I'm gonna go with Lopez, that makes more sense. But here's the thing. Music in an action platformer can actually really drive the game to a whole new level. The thing is that these games have a pace. This game has an energy to it, and the perfect music is going to drive it forward. And this is the case for Berserk Boy. This is not the type of game that you put a YouTube video on in the background and listen to, or you play some other music over. This is the type of game where you need the music to be in sync with everything that you're seeing on screen, because it adds so much. I'm going to play a couple of segments here to show you exactly what I'm talking about, but rest assured, the music is music that I will put in my playlist later on in terms of when it gets on YouTube, or if I'm able to download the OST somewhere. But just listen, because there's a reason they got this composer for this game. Because, well, it seems like a match made in heaven. Now, for content-wise, you got about 6 to 8 hours of gameplay here for the main missions. Granted, you get a bit more from the extra, collectibles, aka those people you find. I'm referring to them as collectibles because they sort of are, but they will unlock new levels that are a little bit more challenging and will test your might in certain ways. Granted, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to do them, but it is a good extra element to push you forward. I do want to point out here that these little side elements that the game sort of throws at you at times is nice. It's a good change of pace. Each level does feel distinct in terms of the overall picture of the game, although I will admit that levels can feel a little bit long at times, especially in the mid-game. It can feel like it's hitting a particular concept home a little bit too much, and considering that there's not a lot of missions in the game, it feels like it's stretching things out just a tiny bit. Now you'll note here that I've gotten to one of the bosses of the area. So in the 3 stages within each area. The first 2 will be the same mini-boss. I call them mini-bosses because they're not your typical bosses that you see that you get a power from, like in, Mega Man games. But I'm going to make a shocking statement here. Well, at least shocking for people's expectations for this game. Because what do you think of when you think of games that are mirroring Mega Man? You think of bosses, the 8 robot masters. Unfortunately for Berserk Boy, at least in my opinion, that is the weakest part of the game. And it is weak by far. Most of these bosses are not a challenge. They aren't. They have certain attacks that are easily dodgeable or just don't do enough damage to really hurt you. Did I die to a boss or two? Yeah, but not to a point where I felt threatened by them. And that's... To prove my point, I'm going to show you the entirety of the first boss battle of the game, or at least the first big boss of the game, the Flame Guy. Now, one of the first things I will say is I do appreciate the pre-boss fight banter, especially with this guy. The puns that he uses in terms of fire, yes, it's cheesy, but it's cheesy in like a 90s cartoon kind of way. I do really like that. Even if at times the English can feel a little bit off, or like they did a voice line and then they changed it later on and didn't re-record the voice line so it doesn't match what is said on screen. But regardless, let's get into the actual battle here. Now note, this is the second time I did this fight. I did die once or twice against bosses, but for the most part, most of these attacks are easily dodgeable. And in a game that it feels like it should be working up to these bosses, you know, the ultimate test of what you've learned. Instead, it feels like it ends on a dull note. And that's consistent with a lot of these bosses. Sure, they have great designs, they have some interesting attacks, but unlike the Mega Man X experience where I was like, okay, how do I deal with this boss? What do I strategize? What's the best power to use? I just beat him. And maybe I was expecting something different from the game, but again, when you specifically call out Mega Man in your press material, that's what I'm going to expect. I also want to briefly touch on the story here. The story is there. Granted, it is not anything to write home about. It is very much on par with what you would expect from an action platformer like this. It is setting the structure for why you're going through the levels. It gives you, oh, you got to collect these, you got to get these flame orb, the wind orb and everything, and it gives you a reason of why he gets the power in question. But other than that, it's nothing to write home about. It's nothing that is going to really be remembered in a couple of years. But the characters are cool. The characters are interesting. I do like some of the interesting traits of the characters, like this one. You know, she loves her data. She's so excited. I love the hand movement. I love when the game emphasizes things like that. But it is, again, sort of background noise for the gameplay in question. I also should note before I sort of wrap it up is that if you are a completionist, this is the type of game that you'll want to play. You'll have to go back through other parts of the levels, earlier levels with new powers, to be able to 100% the game. You're not going to be able to do it all in one run here. And it's the kind of game where you just keep on looking to find that extra element that you missed. And I did appreciate that. It took me back to the older days of SNES, NES games where you had to really, search everywhere and you look, up and down to try to find where the game was hiding the next thing. Let me start to wrap things up here. The thing I want to put forward is that while the game isn't what I expected, sure, I saw some images on Twitter that got me excited for the game. I followed the Twitter. I saw some things that projected what I wanted in a modern day Mega Man X clone. But the thing is that Berserk Boy is its own game. It is a game that's influenced by Mega Man X, by platformers, by games that have come before it. But it's very much a very good platforming experience. It has weaknesses. The bosses are not something that I think the game did well. I think the game did them poorly, in fact. I think the game's combat could be a little bit better. But when it came to the action, when it came to the platforming, the presentation, the music in particular, they all worked for me. And it's the kind of game that I feel like for hardcore fans of the genre, they may not enjoy it as much. They will appreciate nostalgia. They will appreciate certain elements of the game. But in the big picture, they'll want a little bit more, especially those Mega Man X fans. But when I think about the more general audience in general, those who maybe don't necessarily have as many platformers under their belt, who haven't played Mega Man X, who haven't played more difficult platformers, Berserk Boy is a good option for sort of easing you into more difficult platformers, more of the Mega Man X style movement, more of the interesting concepts that are out there for other games. It is unique in terms of its presentation, its, elements that it puts forth, and I think that's why I'm still going to recommend it. Granted, it's not as strong as my colleagues. A lot of people are giving it higher scores, and I'm only going to give it an 80. Just barely hitting a solid buy, unless you're hurting for cash. But, of course, with this channel, that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. And as you've heard throughout this review, that's going to be a huge difference. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to your main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see where the game lies in the buyability rating for you. As you can see, this may be the review with the most enhancers that I've ever done, at least that I can think of recently. The fact of the matter is that this game is going to be very hit or miss depending on your expectations, or depending on what kind of gamer you are. And that's what the enhancer system is for. And normally, I would say that you could always ignore the enhancer system if you want more of a basic, this is what I think of the game in terms of an objective, score. But this is the one case where I would implore you to take the enhancer system into account. The fact of the matter is, I feel like this game is going to find its niche audience, and it's going to find a niche audience that's going to love it. It's going to want a Berserk Boy 2, 3, or even to the point where they may mod the game, or, try to mod the game, to create a whole new world from it. But there are going to be a select series of people that are not going to like it. They're going to expect one thing and get another. And for those people, I would not recommend the game. That's it for this review, but for those who have made it this far into the video, thank you. And those who are subscribed to the channel and have watched my content for a while, I do have a question for you. Because you'll notice that this review very different from a lot of the reviews I do, especially for games like Berserk Boy. I have done reviews where I've done more rambling content, but they've usually been very specific genres. Genres like simulators, or ones that are very specific from moment to moment. Loop Hero is a good example of that. I wanted to try something different after discussing some things with my fiance. After looking at some other reviews and some other more successful channels, it became clear that part of what could be the problem is my personality. And not necessarily my personality, but the way I talk. In real life, or even during my streams on Twitch or on YouTube, I have a very different way of talking. And it's not because I'm trying to be different. It's that when I'm doing a structured video, I can sound very professor-like. I can sound like I'm giving a lecture. And that can come off as impersonal. Granted, I'm trying to give the information that you need to determine whether a game is right for you. But if I want to hit a bigger audience, I may need to consider the personality element of it. Because let's put it bluntly, I've been doing this for a long time. The first video I did was September 5th, 2014. It was a mod spective on Torchlight 2. I didn't necessarily become a reviewer until later on, but the fact of the matter is I've been doing this a while, and yeah, I haven't been successful. Let's just put it bluntly. Granted, I still love what I do, and even giving a game, enough views to be able to buy one copy, in my eye, is worth it. But if I want to be the champion of more games that really deserve it, the Never Awakes, the, Valhallas, I do think that I need to consider my, I don't want to say marketing, but my stance in terms of talking. So I do want to know, for those who have been on this channel, what you think of this rambling review style. Is it more personable? Do you think it is still giving you the information you need? Or is it still a little bit off or a little bit awkward? Again, I'm asking a lot there, but any information to make these videos better, I will take. But that will be it for now. As for the next review, I have no idea. These are 2 reviews I did within a very short period of time, to the point where, yeah, I wish I had more time on them, but little things came up. Like right now, our heating and air conditioning isn't working very well, and it is 96 degrees upstairs. I'm sweating my hair off. Anyway, if you like this video, hit that like button. As for the next review, it may be Parasite Eve, or it may be a review that is of an indie game that's upcoming. Join the Discord if you want to know more. Anyway, that's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming.